Snoozecast, a podcast designed to help you fall asleep. Find us on snoozecast.com and follow us on Instagram at Snoozecast to find behind-the-scenes content. If you enjoy our show, you can support us by writing a review on the Apple Podcasts app. Please know that we read and appreciate every single one, and it makes our show more discoverable to new listeners. If you would like to get an email once a week with upcoming sleep stories and other news, subscribe to this newsletter at snoozecast.com. This episode is dedicated to a listener named Kasturi and brought to you by Dancing on the Green. Tonight, we'll read an excerpt from Tess of the D'Urbervilles, a novel by Thomas Hardy, published in 1891. Hardy's writing often explores what he calls the ache of modernism, and this theme is notable in Tess, which, as one critic noted, portrays the energy of traditional ways and the strength of the forces that are destroying them. Now considered a major work of its time, it received mixed reviews when it first appeared, in part because it challenged the morals of late Victorian England. Let's get cozy. Close your eyes. Relax your body into the softness of your bed. Now, take a few deep breaths. The village of Marlott lay amid the northeastern undulations of the beautiful Vale of Blakemore, or Blackmore, an engirdled and secluded region, for the most part untrodden as yet by tourist or landscape painter, though within a 4 hours' journey from London. It is a vale whose acquaintance is best made by viewing it from the summits of the hills that surround it, except perhaps during the droughts of summer. An unguided ramble into its recesses in bad weather is apt to engender distraction with its narrow and miry ways. This fertile and sheltered tract of country, in which the fields are never brown and the springs never dry, is bounded on the south by the bold chalk ridge. The traveler from the coast who, after plodding northward for a score of miles over downs and cornlands, suddenly reaches the verge of one of these escarpments, is surprised and delighted to behold, extended like a map beneath him, a country differing absolutely from that which he has passed. Behind him the hills are open. The sun blazes down upon fields so large as to give an unenclosed character to the landscape. The lanes are white, the hedges low and plashed, the atmosphere colorless. Here, in the valley, the world seems to be constructed upon a smaller and more delicate scale. The fields are mere paddocks, so reduced that from this height their hedgerows appear a network of dark green threads overspreading the paler green of the grass. The atmosphere beneath is languorous and is so tinged with blue that what artists call the middle distance partakes also of that hue, while the horizon beyond is of the deepest ultramarine. Arable lands are few and limited. With but slight exceptions, the prospect is a broad, rich mass of grass and trees, mantling minor hills and dales within the major. Such is the Vale of Blackmore. The district is of historic, no less than of topographical interest. The vale was known in former times as the Forest of White Hart, from a curious legend of King Henry III's reign, in which the killing by a certain Thomas de la Linde of a beautiful white hart which the king had run down and spared was made the occasion of a heavy fine. In those days, until comparatively recent times, the country was densely wooded. Even now, traces of its earlier condition are to be found in the old oak copses and irregular belts of timber that yet survive upon its slopes, and the hollow-trunked trees that shade so many of its pastures. The forests have departed, but some old customs of their shades remain. Many, however, linger only in a disguised form. The May Day dance, for instance, was to be discerned on the afternoon under notice, in the guise of the club revel, or club walking, as it was there called. It was an interesting event to the younger inhabitants of Marlott, though its real interest was not observed by the participators in the ceremony. Its singularity lay less in the retention of a custom of walking in procession and dancing on each anniversary than in the members being solely women. In men's clubs, such celebrations were, though expiring, less common. The club of Marlott alone had walked for hundreds of years, if not as benefit club, as votive sisterhood of some sort, and it walked still. The banded ones were all dressed in white gowns, a happy survival from old-style days when cheerfulness and Maytime were synonyms, days before the habit of taking long views had reduced emotions to a monotonous average. Their first exhibition of themselves was in a processional march of 2 and 2 round the parish. Ideal and real clashed slightly as the sun lit up their figures against the green hedges and creeper-laced house fronts, For, though the whole troop wore white garments, no two whites were alike among them. Some approached pure blanching. Some had a bluish pallor. Some wore by the older characters, which had possibly lain by folded for many a year, inclined to a cadaverous tint and to a Georgian style. In addition to the distinction of a white frock, every woman and girl carried in her right hand a peeled willow wand, and in her left a bunch of white flowers. The peeling of the former and the selection of the latter had been an operation of personal care. There were some middle-aged and elderly women in the train, with silvery, wiry hair and wrinkled faces. The young girls formed, indeed, the majority of the band, and their heads of luxuriant hair reflected in the sunshine every tone of gold, black, and brown. Some had beautiful eyes, others a beautiful nose, others a beautiful mouth, an inability to balance their heads and to dissociate self-consciousness from their features was apparent in them and showed that they were genuine country girls, unaccustomed to many eyes. And as each and all of them were warmed without by the sun, so each had a private little sun for her soul to bask in. Some dream, some affection, some hobby, at least some remote and distant hope which, though perhaps starving to nothing, still lived on, as hopes will. They were all cheerful, and many of them merry. They came round by the Pure Drop Inn, and were turning out of the high road to pass through a wicket gate into the meadows, when one of the women said, "The Lord, O Lord, why, Tess Durbeyfield, if there isn't thy father riding home in a carriage." A young member of the band turned her head at the exclamation. She was a fine and handsome girl, not handsomer than some others, possibly, but her peony mouth and large, innocent eyes added eloquence to color and shape. She wore a red ribbon in her hair, and was the only one of the white company who could boast of such a pronounced adornment. As she looked round, Durbeyfield was seen moving among the road in a chaise belonging to the Pure Drop, driven by a frizzle-headed, brawny damsel, with her gown sleeves rolled above her elbows. This was the cheerful servant of that establishment, who, in her part, turned groom and ostler at times. Durbeyfield, leaning back, and with his eyes closed luxuriously, was waving his hand above his head and singing in a slow recitative, "I've got a great family vault at Kingsbere, and knighted forefathers in lead coffins there. The clubbists tittered, except the girl called Tess, in whom a slow heat seemed to rise at the sense that her father was making himself foolish in their eyes. "He's tired, that's all," she said hastily. "And he's got a lift home because our own horse has to rest today." "Bless thy simplicity, Tess," said her companions. "He's got his market niche, ha ha." "Look here, I won't walk another inch with you if you say any jokes about him," Tess cried, and the color upon her cheeks spread over her face and neck. In a moment her eyes grew moist, and her glance drooped to the ground. Perceiving that they had really pained her, they said no more, and order again prevailed. Tess's pride would not allow her to turn her head again to learn what her father's meaning was, if he had any, and thus she moved on with the whole body to the enclosure where there was to be dancing on the green. By the time the spot was reached, she had recovered her equanimity and tapped her neighbor with her wand and talked as usual. Tess Durbeyfield, at this time of her life, was a mere vessel of emotion, untinctured by experience. The dialect was on her tongue to some extent, despite the village school. The characteristic intonation of that dialect for this district being the voicing approximately rendered by the syllable probably as rich an utterance as any to be found in human speech. The pouted up, deep red mouth to which this syllable was native had hardly as yet settled into its definite shape, and her lower lip had a way of thrusting the middle of her top one upward when they closed together after a word. Phases of her childhood lurked in her aspect still. As she walked along today, for all her handsome womanliness, you could sometimes see her 12th year in her cheeks, or her 9th sparkling from her eyes, and even her 5th would flit over the curves of her mouth now and then. Yet few knew, and still fewer considered this. A small minority, mainly strangers, would look long at her in casually passing by and grow momentarily fascinated by her freshness and wonder if they would ever see her again. But to almost everybody, she was a fine and picturesque country girl, and no more. Nothing was seen or heard further of Durbeyfield in his triumphal chariot under the conduct of the ostleress, and the club having entered the allotted space, dancing began. As there were no men in the company, the girls danced at first with each other, but when the hour for the close of labor drew on, the masculine inhabitants of the village, together with other idlers and pedestrians, gathered round the spot and appeared inclined to negotiate for a partner. Among these onlookers were 3 young men of a superior class, carrying small knapsacks strapped to their shoulders and stout sticks in their hands. Their general likeness to each other and their consecutive ages would almost have suggested that they might be, what in fact they were, brothers. The eldest wore the white tie, high waistcoat, and thin-brimmed hat of the regulation curate. The second was the normal undergraduate. The appearance of the third and youngest would hardly have been sufficient to characterize him. There was an uncribbed aspect in his eyes and attire, implying that he had hardly as yet found the entrance to his professional groove, that he was a desultory tentative student of something and everything might only have been predicted of him. These 3 brethren told casual acquaintance that they were spending their Whitsun holidays in a walking tour through the Vale of Blackmore, their course being southwesterly from the town of Shaston on the northeast. They leant over the gate by the highway and inquired as to the meaning of the dance and the white-frocked maids. The 2 elder of the brothers were plainly not intending to linger more than a moment, but the spectacle of a bevy of girls dancing without male partners seemed to amuse the third and make him in no hurry to move on. He unstrapped his knapsack, put it, with his stick, on the hedge bank, and opened the gate. "What are you going to do, Angel?" asked the eldest. "I'm inclined to go and have a fling with them. Why not all of us, just for a minute or 2? It won't detain us long." No, nonsense," said the first. "Dancing in public with a troop of country hoydens. Suppose we should be seen. Come along, or it will be dark before we get to Stour Castle, and there's no place we can sleep at nearer than that. Besides, we must get through another chapter of A Counterblast to Agnosticism before we turn in. Now I have taken the trouble to bring the book." "All right. I'll catch up to you and Cuthbert in 5 minutes. Don't stop. I give my word that I will, Felix." The 2 elder reluctantly left him, taking their brother's knapsack to relieve him in following, and the youngest entered the field. "This is 1,000 pities," he said gallantly to 2 or 3 of the girls nearest him, as soon as there was a pause in the dance. "Where are your partners, my dears?" "They've not left off work yet," answered one of the boldest. "They'll be here by and by. Till then, will you be one, sir?" "Certainly. But what's one among so many?" "Better than none. 'Tis melancholy work facing and footing it to one of your own sort, and no clipsing and coaling at all. Now pick and choose." "Shh, don't be so forward," said a shyer girl. The young man, thus invited, glanced them over and attempted some discrimination, but as the group were all so new to him, he could not very well exercise it. He took almost the first that came to hand, which was not the speaker, as she had expected, nor did it happen to be Tess Durbeyfield. Pedigree, ancestral skeletons, monumental record. The D'Urberville lineaments did not help Tess in her life's battle as yet, even to the extent of attracting to her a dancing partner over the heads of the commonest peasantry. So much for Norman blood, unaided by Victorian lucre. The name of the eclipsing girl, whatever it was, has not been handed down, but she was envied by all as the first who enjoyed the luxury of a masculine partner that evening. Yet such was the force of example that the village young men, who had not hastened to enter the gate while no intruder was in the way, now dropped in quickly, and soon the couples became leavened with rustic youth to a marked extent, till at length the plainest woman in the club was no longer compelled to foot it on the masculine side of the figure. The church clock struck, when suddenly the student said that he must leave. He had been forgetting himself. He had to join his companions. As he fell out of the dance, his eyes lighted on Tess Durbeyfield, whose own large orbs were, to tell the truth, the faintest aspect of reproach that he had not chosen her. He, too, was sorry then that, owing to her backwardness, he had not observed her, and with that in his mind, he left the pasture. On account of his long delay, he started in a flying run down the lane westward, and had soon passed the hollow and mounted the next rise. He had not yet overtaken his brothers, but he paused to get breath and look back. He could see the white figures of the girls in the green enclosure whirling about as they had whirled when he was among them. They seemed to have quite forgotten him already. All of them, except perhaps one. This white shape stood apart by the hedge alone. From her position, he knew it to be the pretty maiden with whom he had not danced. Trifling as the matter was, he yet instinctively felt that she was hurt by his oversight. He wished that he had asked her. He wished that he had inquired her name. She was so modest, so expressive. She had looked so soft in her thin white gown that he felt he had acted stupidly. However, it could not be helped, and turning and bending himself to a rapid walk, he dismissed the subject from his mind. As for Tess Durbeyfield, she did not so easily dislodge the incident from her consideration. She had no spirit to dance again for a long time, though she might have had plenty of partners. But they did not speak so nicely as the strange young man had done. It was not till the rays of the sun had absorbed the young stranger's retreating figure on the hill that she shook off her temporary sadness and answered her would-be partner in the affirmative. She remained with her comrades till dusk and participated with a certain zest in the dancing.